Hi there. Welcome to Retirement Your Way. I'm Debbi Marcum, and I'd love to invite and welcome my gorgeous co-host, Jaclyn. How are you doing?
Debbie, I am here. I am
I'm
alive.
impressed.
I do have to share with our listeners, in Minnesota here, we got over a foot of snow
Hmm,
this weekend.
in March.
And yes, in March, which isn't all that, atypical, but I had to
Mm-mm,
use a snowblower for the first time.
mm-mm.
Yeah, that was an experience, Debbie. Let's just say there were some words that were said and I was on FaceTime with my dad, like, how do I get this to work? And I just remember watching people walk on by. And when you're like using a loud machine, you don't realize how loud your voice carries
Yeah.
because you can't personally hear it. Well, apparently I swore and the walkers were walking by and they were just like, is she
Covering their children's ears.
I mean, that is how bad it was. Yep, we're not going there.
Mm.
My parents are coming back tonight and they will be dealing with the driveway. I don't know what I did. All I could do is get my own car out.
Well, I'm impressed. And especially since, I mean, if we get 1 inch, we're shut down for a week. I can't
Yes,
imagine having, over 12 inches. But I
yes.
don't know if you can see outside our window, but we have the yo-yo weather this spring. And well,
Mm.
it's not quite spring yet, which winter reminded us today because we actually have snow flurries and it's supposed to be about 80 this weekend. So we're going to get whiplash.
Yes, yes. And I
So,
feel like that is the thing all over the country, except I'm not really sure Arizona's going down. They just seem
whoo,
continue
no,
to go
it's
up.
going to get extremely hot where we where we used to live, and I was like, oh, I don't know that I want to be there right now. But hopefully, our connection is working today because we have nasty weather in both of our locations, and sometimes that affects Wi-Fi.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
So
So,
forgive us if it's not great today,
yes, yes.
out of our control.
Absolutely. Well, I think that this topic, I just want you to kind of explain it, Debbie, because it's a long title, and I feel like sometimes we're going back to the first grade, education. Like, what
I agree.
what are the 5 questions, right?
I
So,
agree.
where are we gonna go with this, Debbie?
Well, I did. And this came about because of one, not only the weather and discussions that I've had with clients, but also family members and friends that have been considering this. But today is kind of the who, what, when, where, and why of retirement. So, certainly not going to go into everything about retirement, but today's topic is going to specifically deal about where you're choosing to live in retirement, especially as you are advancing in years, because that drastically impacts where you want to live and sometimes where you can live or where you need to live. So it's I guess even though it encompasses all the who, what, when, where, and why, it's primarily the where and what should you do. And
Mhm.
planning ahead of time is kind of paramount.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just want to start off with maybe you sharing that story of your, past client or client and, just sharing kind of what maybe went wrong in their situation and what to maybe avoid.
I will definitely do that. I may not start off with that story because it kind of segues into one of my recommendations for you. But the first thing I think you need to consider is where do you want to live? And
Mhm.
there are a lot of things that come into that. Uh, that also encompasses the who. Do you want to live near family? Do you need to live near family?
Mhm.
Is climate a consideration? Which, we moved to Tennessee from Arizona, and quite a few of my clients ended up changing their location because of climate. This week might impact some of them as well, since it's supposed to be 105 in March
Mhm.
there, which never happened when we were living there. So, climate can definitely be, a determining factor about where do you want to live. Um, uh, One thing that people often forget to consider is, do you want to have quality health care? And as you get older, I think that is definitely a consideration that you need to take into, account when you're figuring out the where.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I
and
think it's important to note here that
yes,
this
it is.
conversation, is also maybe a conversation that you should have with your children,
Yes.
right? Because we're talking long-term care. What if something happens to you? What if you're mentally disabled? Are you going to put not a burden, but are your children going to take care of you? Are you going to
Mhm.
be planning on going into a long-term care facility? Have those conversations with family to decide maybe when it's not up to you, what is the
I
plan?
agree. I agree. And as you know, as I do powers of attorney with my clients and they're starting to choose who's their medical power of attorney, where they live is often a consideration
Mhm.
because it's not always convenient to have your healthcare power of attorney live 4 states away.
Yeah.
So those are all things that you need to consider when you're thinking about where to live. Do you I'll be honest, most retirees as they progress typically move from, boy, I love to live in my house and I'm going to die here, to this is becoming a burden.
Yeah.
Taking care of the yard is a burden. Keeping up with all of the taxes and the upkeep, or this house is too large. That becomes a consideration for them. And a lot of retirees, love to start downsizing. And, you know, having downsized, after my late husband died, I can tell you that that is kind of freeing. So downsizing is often a big consideration. Do you want to own? Do you want to rent? And there's our pros and cons of each of those. And those are things that you really need to consider. So in doing some research for this, I just kind of wanted to figure out, what's a typical cost in moving to more, I'm going to refer to this as a retirement community.
Okay.
So you can move into apartment complexes that are mainly 55 plus. You can move to communities that are 55 plus. And many of them you buy your own home, many of them you lease or rent. So you
Mhm.
have options there. But for the most part, they ranged anywhere from $1,400 to $4,000 a month. Obviously, a huge change, a huge
Wow.
difference in the cost there. So, you one of the first things you do need to do after you figure out where do I want to move location wise, the area of the country, the area of a state, the area of a particular town. Do you want to live in the city? Do you want to live in a nice suburb? Do you want quiet? Do you want the hubbub and the busy? So
Mhm.
those kind of reflect back on some of the questions that we asked last week, of what do you want your retirement to look like. So today I kind of want to focus on those niche communities that are specifically targeted to retirees. So
Yeah.
those are often called 55 plus communities, and there are some amazing ones out there. So I have some tips on how to help you choose
Yeah.
that.
Well, I
And
think let's start off with, just talking about the most commonly known one, which is the villages in
yes,
Florida.
yes.
And I think this is a great representation of bougie. Do you know what that
Yes.
means?
Oh, yes. My
Bougie.
daughter taught me that
Okay.
that term.
Well, for our listeners and viewers who do not know what bougie means, it means like rich looking, just kind of show off in a way. And, the villages in Orlando, Florida. Well, it's actually its own city. I'm almost
Yes, it
positive,
is.
right?
I
So
think it is now, yeah.
yeah, and, they ride golf carts around, you have your own independent living, you can live with your spouse, all that sort of things, and everything's basically there,
Yes.
but it's really, really expensive.
Yes, it is.
And so, how can we find maybe a happy medium in, getting maybe all of those amenities that we want and weighing the cost? Because
Yes.
you also need to weigh in long-term care costs,
Yes,
once
you
you're
do.
able or you're unable to care for yourself in medical conditions. And so how do we do that, Debbie? Where should we start with
Well, I
debating
tell you,
and
the first thing you need to do is research. So, I mean,
Mhm.
thanks to, the World Wide Web internet, you can do tons of research on it. However, you need to go far beyond what looks good on paper.
Yes.
And so researching is a great source. There are also some wonderful resources out there that can help you with it. US News and World has a database of some of the best retirement communities in the United States. Caring.com gives reviews. Medicare will often have a database. So there's some great resources out there to help. I also know several, financial advisors who kind of assist their clients with that.
Mhm.
Um, I'm able to do that and a broader range because I have clients in so many different states. So I have, you know, I have a list of contacts of where my clients can go to kind of help them with these things. But the first thing you need to do is determine a budget,
Mm.
because things can look fantastic on paper. And just like, you know, the well-known place in Florida, you know, I kind of think of, you know, a luxury cruise line
Yes.
where, you know, just about everything is available. It could be party city. And from what I understand, it's kind of party city and it can be
Yes.
overwhelming. I've actually had clients that have gone there and checked it out and they said, whew, I thought Bucky's was overwhelming. The village was just overwhelming. They quickly discovered that it looked great on perfect. It looked perfect on paper for them. It had, you know, all of those little check marks of things that they wanted. And then when they got there, they went, okay, this is not what I wanted.
Mhm.
Just like some people think a cruise is fantastic for them, and they get there and they realize this is just
Yes.
too much, or you know,
Yes.
no, I need terra firma. You know, so I think going in person is one of the best things that you can do once you've kind of researched and once you've determined your budget. Just like a good real estate agent is not going to take you to a $2 million house if you can only afford a $350,000 house.
Mhm.
So I think not setting yourself up for disappointment is kind of paramount. Don't set your sights on, you know, this luxury place that has anything and everything for you if you can't afford that. But even if you can't afford it, sometimes it still looks great on paper. I have a
Mhm.
client here. Here comes the story that I told you earlier. I have a client whose father moved to a very luxurious 55 plus community. And it's basically its own little city. It has everything. It has shops, it has spas, it has salons, it has doctor's offices, grocery stores, it has everything there. And unfortunately, he has started having some pretty serious health issues. And this is such a popular place and it's there's a waiting list to get in. Unfortunately, the doctor's offices are also the same way, and it is going to take him 7 to 8 months just to get in to see the physician. And that was one of the primary reasons why he chose this community to live in. So I think when you go to visit one of these places, you know, first of all, if they, you know, if they have dinner, stay for dinner, find out what the food is like.
Mhm.
um, Talk to the residents. Take a checklist of your most important questions and ask the residents. Um, you know, clearly you want to talk to the personnel there and see how they treat, how they respond to the community. But I think it's important to talk to the residents. Okay, what do you love most about this? If
Mhm.
you could change anything, what would you change about living here? Talk to the residents. If at all possible, I would arrange to stay a day or two, which we had a relative to. They were considering moving because of health conditions, and it is going to progress, you know, to being a more serious health issue. And they stayed overnight. They realized this is not going to be where we need to be 5 or 10 years down the road.
Mhm.
Um, and that's the health issue is huge because it may be perfect for you when you are 70. It may not become perfect for you if you are 85 and starting to exhibit health issues, mobility issues. You know, is there transportation available? Is it easy to get in to see doctors? Does it progress so that you have, you know, more assistance than you may need at the very beginning? You may not need any assistance. It may be just living in a wonderful community where everyone happens to be 55 or older, to, okay, we need someone to come in. We need home health care. We need, you know, memory care. So those are things that you want to consider. If you have a family history of Parkinson's, you may want to look, okay, I'm going to need someone to assist me with these things. I want to make sure that I'm moving to something that is one level and I'm not going to have to deal with stairs down the road.
Yeah, and I
Alzheimer's, is
think
there memory care
yeah,
issue? Yeah.
Debbie, I think you bring up a really good point about, really we're focusing on the when here and the
Yes.
timeline, but also the progression
Hmm.
and the steps to get there, right?
Yes.
So when we talk about, maybe the villages, we'll just use that as an example. It's, independent homes.
Yes.
So you have to either drive a vehicle or drive a golf cart,
Hmm.
right? To anywhere, to go get
Yes.
food, to go, to the wherever you need to go, you're driving. And
Yes.
so is that going to give you progression to, maybe be able to independently live or have somebody come to the house? It's, a very gated community. So how is
Yes.
outsiders going to be able to come in? How are visitors going to come and visit you? There's all those questions. And so, I know that my in-laws, they, was just diagnosed with dementia, and so they moved into an apartment, independent living in a community. And then, they have memory care downstairs. So then that progression will get her going in there.
That's
But even
fantastic.
even the memory care, those have wait lists.
Yes, they do.
And so if they did not move into the independent living in the apartment, then they would be pushed on the wait list for years for the
Yes.
memory care. And so you also want to think about not the loopholes, but in a way, they're a little bit of the loopholes of starting in those areas because it's the progression to get you in the other
Yes.
areas.
Yes, it is. And even things like HOA fees,
Yes.
sometimes those costs are hidden. They don't give you those up front.
Mhm.
So, that's one thing when you're asking those questions. Okay, are there going to be additional costs that are not evident
Yes.
now?
Yes.
Um, is there I mean, do some research into their reputation. Are
Mhm.
they known for, okay, this year it is X amount of dollars, but whoo, it increased by 35% by year
Mhm.
three. That's a pretty big increase. So you need to check into their reputation. You need to check, those resources. And I strongly, strongly encourage you to go in person
Yes.
and think about, okay, the what ifs, which we often talk about, on this
Yes.
podcast. You need to plan for those what ifs. Um, Even if you have a history of Alzheimer's in your family, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to. However, it would be foolish of you to not consider that possibility if there is that family history. If there's a family history of heart disease, if there's a family history of Parkinson's or some of those more debilitating diseases, you need to consider, okay, what if this happens in 10 years? I mean, moving is one of the most intense
Stressful.
experiences and stressful could do. And so the last thing you want is to move someplace thinking this is going to be your forever home, only to have to move after 5 years because health issues have come into play
Yes.
or other
Well,
circumstances.
and what's funny to me is just having this conversation with you, Debbie, honestly reminds me of choosing a college. And just I mean,
Yes.
just the comparisons of what
Mhm.
city, what state do you wanna go? How are the living situations? What's the cost? Are you gonna be able to
Mhm.
walk places? Are all these places accessible? Like, it truly does, and you
Yes.
don't wanna make the wrong decision because, you're gonna be there, that's where your degree is gonna be, that's where you're gonna be there
Yeah.
forever, but at the same time, there's always an out, and if
Yes.
it turns out to be bad, so what? You transfer, so what? You
Yes.
you you figure out the next move. It might put
That's
you years
easier at 20
behind,
than
but
it is at 80.
yes, yes, but, it's just kind of that correlation of that
Mhm.
just is what that reminded me of.
You're right. Life is cyclical in many time in many cases.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm so glad that we kinda touched on all 5. Is there
Yeah.
anything else that we're missing here, Debbie?
Uh, Ask questions, do tons of research. Um, Check and see if your financial advisor or your lawyer or sometimes even a CPA can assist you with that. Um, use use your resources to ask for help. That's one thing that I've become much better at as I've gotten older is being willing to ask for help. The worst that can happen is they can say no.
Mhm.
No harm, no foul. But ask for your help. What do you suggest? Or especially with your financial advisors, what should my budget be for these expenses? And when I mentioned the $1,400 to $4,000, at first $4,000 just seems, oh gosh, that's a lot of money. But if it's also including your transportation and all of the
Yeah.
expenses that you incur, including food, it starts to look much more reasonable.
Mhm.
So talk to your financial advisor. Is this something that I should consider? I might want to mention that I do have some clients that they actually rented their home out and they used that to fund their new location. So there are some wonderful ways to do it. A charitable trust is a great way to kind of
Mhm.
fund, a new home if you need to do that. So there are a lot of options out there, and a good financial advisor can assist you with that.
Yeah, and I think, it starts with communication, right?
Yes.
Communication with your family, maybe even we go back to the friend conversation of maybe you wanna talk to your friends and see if there's a place that you both wanna
Hmm.
live, you know? There's all sorts of those conversations, but you just have to open it up, and I know
Yeah.
it's kind of sometimes a scary conversation, but just create little conversations little by little tidbits here.
Well, and I did. I learned some pretty fascinating things when I was doing some research on this. There are some niche, for example, there's one that it's actually considered a Jimmy Buffett themed retirement community. So everything is themed Jimmy Buffett. So I could just picture all of these little couples in their little Hawaiian shirts. uh, yeah, which I thought that was kind of
That'd be
fascinating.
fun.
I also have another client, and he has a very close relative who has leased a luxury, you know, suite on a very nice cruise ship, and he
Yes.
owns this for 16 years, and he just travels the world. And I've heard of quite a few retirees that have actually they live year round on a cruise
Yes.
ship, and it's cheaper than
Mhm.
living, on terra firma.
Uh-huh.
So there are options out there, and you know, designing your retirement the way you want it. I think where you want to live is a huge part of it, and you do have
Mhm.
options.
Yeah, and maybe looking into different countries. I hate to
Yes.
say that, but, I know Puerto Rico
Hmm.
is a top one that people are wanting to move
Yeah.
to. So just opening up your options. You're absolutely right,
Hmm.
Debbie, and asking questions. Asking
Yes,
all sorts of questions to whoever, but a good start would be your financial advisor.
I
So,
agree.
Debbie, how can our listeners and viewers get a hold of you?
The easiest way to reach me is to contact my office at 866-247-5695. You can also email me. You can, in fact, I would love to hear from the viewers that are watching this. And if you have suggestions on things that you'd like us to discuss, I'd like to hear those as well. But you have quite a few options to reach us. You can reach me on Facebook. Of course, we invite you to listen to our podcast. You can find us on, you know, YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, on quite a few places. But I also want to mention, because I had two clients call me today, they're feeling uneasy with the market volatility
Mhm.
that's going on. And so, if you have concerns about that as well, please reach out, because there are some wonderful, safe options that have great financial growth in them as well, that I know your financial advisor would love to discuss with you. Kind
Yeah.
of ease some of those concerns.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, volatility in the
Yes.
market and also in our lives right now, and so
Hmm.
it's so important to have that conversation with a financial advisor and maybe get some peace of mind
I
regarding that,
agree.
and Debbie, you are always able to help and, so
Well,
I
thank
love
you.
that. And to our listeners and
Thank you.
viewers, you can always find our episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music, as well as see our beautiful faces on YouTube. So please comment with suggestions, send email, subscribe so you can be notified every time a new video is out. But for now, you'll be stuck with the two of us today. So,
Yes.
thank you for listening. And that does it for this episode of Retirement Your Way with our host, Debbi Marcum.